Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify, and when you want to take conversations with your fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions, and best of all, it's totally free. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today.
Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. Excited to talk about Week 1 recap. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify. Follow us on Instagram and X, not Twitter, the artist formerly known as Twitter, X. You can also send me an email, big10footballtalk@gmail.com. Also want to give a plug to the Big Ten Huddle podcast. JR, who hosts that podcast, had me on as a special guest. It dropped Monday morning. We reviewed Week 1 there, along with Russ from the Boiler Express podcast. Great guys. I'm hoping to get them on the pod at some point, which will most likely be determined both by my ability to figure out technology and also just scheduling. But just great guys, great minds for ball, and we just had fun. We had fun talking about ball. So check that out on YouTube. Check out the Big Ten Huddle podcast and the Boiler Express podcasts on Apple and Google and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Awesome dudes. Follow them on X as well. Really good guys. I also want to give a shout out to GP Bootleg 11, who left a review. Really want to thank you for your comments. And a couple things that you mentioned were just my take on the Big Ten West. And listen, I love it when people comment on what I think, whether they agree or disagree. And we're actually going to get into some of what you mentioned about my thoughts about the West. And we're going to be able to do that because we're recapping all the games. And so I really want to dive into some of the games of all the games of the week. I want to dive into that. I want to get to my Big Ten power rankings. I'm not going to get into my top 10 this week just because as I'm recording, Clemson is playing. They're in a dogfight right now with Duke, which I'm not too surprised by. Also, I'm not going to be surprised if Clemson loses Week 1 because that's about par for the course for my playoff picks. Is I always pick one team who just blows it big. Could be Clemson, could be Ohio State for all I know after their game with Indiana. But we're just going to dive right in. So again, JP Bootleg, really appreciate your thoughts. You were questioning some of my Big Ten West predictions, and I want to just get right to Nebraska and Minnesota. I think one of the critiques, and again I appreciated it, was you were asking how could I pick Nebraska to struggle so much when I have said all along that coaching is the problem. The reality is culture takes a long time to move on from. And that's why I don't think Nebraska is going to do well this year. And I think we saw that play out this past week, right? The game changed on a fumble and a face mask penalty in the fourth quarter. You can talk about the play calling with Satterfield all you want. And it was bad. right? Like situational play calling was atrocious. But it was a fumble and a face mask penalty that allowed Minnesota to get that game-tying touchdown, which was a sensational grab by Daniel Jackson, by the way. Just an incredible toe tap, toe drag. It was awesome. And I've been saying, look out for Daniel Jackson, okay? As a wide receiver, he's a good-looking wideout. And they've got a few, right? I thought Crooms played well. They did not have Ottman Bell in this game. But with Nebraska, I'm excited about their potential. I thought their defense played better than I expected. Although I don't know how much that was good Nebraska defense and bad Minnesota offense. We'll get to Minnesota in a minute. But my hesitation, one, is Sims at quarterback. They've got to figure out how to run an offense with him because he's dynamic. He's got good legs, but threw 3 picks. And I just think culture takes a long time. And while I do trust Matt Rule, I really trust Matt Rule. But if you look at his career trajectory, it's, Baylor, Temple, each of his first seasons, I think, is 1 win at Temple, 2 wins at Baylor. It took a year. And by the way, who's not taking 1 year is Colorado, which is why I think Nebraska starts 0-2. It's not because I think Matt Rule's not the answer. It's because I think it's going to take a long time. Like, longer than Nebraska fans want. And actually, if I'm a Nebraska fan, I'm actually encouraged by Thursday night. I don't think the sky is falling. I think it's the reality that your culture was worse than you realized, and it's going to take time. You can't just bring in a bunch of transfers and a new coach and be good overnight. Nebraska's been a bottom feeder Big Ten program for the past 2 years, for the past 4 years. That's where they've been. You don't become a middle-of-the-pack Big Ten team overnight. So if they do, that's a huge, huge win for Nebraska. But you got to understand where they've been. Now, I want to talk Minnesota for a minute. And you were absolutely GP Bootleg was absolutely right about this. I underestimated the loss of John Michael Schmitz and that offensive line. They could not run to save their lives against what I think is probably a pretty mid defense in Nebraska. And so I thought Kaliak Manis, he had his moments. I thought his arm was live. I thought he made some good decisions. I also thought he made some bad ones. But the reality is this Minnesota team cannot survive on the pass alone. Kaliak Manis is not experienced enough. And as good as these receivers are, they need a running game. And Sean Tyler and that offensive line was not it on Thursday. So I was wrong on Minnesota. I'm very concerned about them moving forward. I'm actually more excited about Nebraska than I am Minnesota. I think Minnesota got lucky. I will say this, though. Tyler Nubin, first team All Big Ten safety. That dude's awesome. That dude's great. Anchors that back end. Just awesome. Let me move to Central Michigan, Michigan State. There's not much to talk about. In that game, I picked it 38-21. Really what I thought was it would be close in the first half and Michigan State would pull away. It's exactly what happened. Michigan State pulled away. Kim, the quarterback, looked somewhat decent. But reality, there's just not much you're going to be able to know from this game because Central Michigan, honestly, is probably a middle-of-the-pack MAC team. Michigan State did what they're supposed to do. I'm not sure what to make of them. Kim played well, and that bodes well for them. But I don't think you can take much away from it. And the fact that they struggled in the first half gives me concern. It gives me concern. Number 2, Michigan defeated East Carolina 30-3. That game, if I'm being honest, that score just looks like kind of meh. It was over at halftime. Like, they really just shut it down. I mean, Michigan, they went 3-and-out their first series because they were pinned in their own 5-yard line. But then afterwards, they just did what they wanted. J.J. McCarthy played really well. I think has established himself as a top 3 quarterback in this league. The running backs, I don't think were great. I'm still wondering if Blake Corum is a little dinged from his injury last season. But the reality is they'll figure out the running game. I think East Carolina was loading up to stop the run, which gave JJ a lot of time to throw. And they got up 30-0, and they kind of shut it down. And so not much to take away, except that they were dominant like they were supposed to be. They were dominant like they were supposed to be. Ohio State, Indiana, this game, what do I say about the Buckeyes? And what do I say about Indiana? I'll start with Indiana. I don't understand what Tom Allen's game plan was. I don't think anybody expected the triple option or like a shotgun triple option. It was a little weird. They certainly had some guys that flashed. Jalen Lucas, I think he's going to give anyone nightmares if he's healthy. I hope he is healthy after what looked like a pretty bad ding in the third quarter of that game. The number 44, I missed his name, but number 44 on defense for Indiana he's legit. Like he's a game wrecker, and he's really good. I think Taven Jackson showed that he can make some plays as a runner and as a thrower. There wasn't much for Indiana to take away offensively, but there were definitely some flashes of things where they could at least give teams some issues. I still am not very high on them, but I think they could get a couple more wins than I expected. I think at least on defense, I thought they played at least somewhat well. I think for Ohio State, defensively, you're as encouraged as you can be, right? They played a team that doesn't have many offensive weapons, but they didn't do anything flashy. Like they didn't blitz, they didn't do much of that. They just kind of played their base defense the whole time, or at least that's what it seemed like. And they didn't really let any big plays go by. They kept everything in front of them. They got a lot of penetration on the defensive line, a number of tackles for loss. There wasn't going to be many opportunities for sacks. There wasn't going to be many opportunities to really rush the passer because they didn't really drop back much. So if you were coming in and concerned about the defense, I don't think there's much you can take away other than, okay, they dominated the way that they should. They didn't let Cam Camper go crazy on them. They didn't let the triple option look confuse them. They didn't get lulled to sleep and let a big-time pass reception go by. They allowed a few. I think there were maybe 3 plays of 15 yards or more, but nothing that was crazy, right? And so that's a good sign. The offense, oof. If they don't figure out the offense, this team's going 8-4. And I have confidence in the players. Like, I thought Kyle McCord had some really good moments. I thought the running backs had good moments. Chip Trayanum, man, that dude, I love the potential of Travion. But, man, in terms of vision and just toughness, breaking tackles, he doesn't do it. But train him. He's got a little jump cut. He's got some wiggle, and guys bounce off him. Like, I'm not sure he's not RB1 for this team, which is crazy because he was brought in as a linebacker. So it's insane. The game plan, though, 5 catches, 34 yards for Marv and Emeka combined. That would be ridiculous if that was just one of them. That was their stat line. 5 catches for 34 yards between the top 2 receivers in college football. That is a reflection of bad play calling and honestly bad coaching. And that's where my concern is with this Ohio State team. The offensive line needs to get better, for sure. But I don't understand when your best position group is wide receivers. Why on earth do you not put 4 wide all the time or 3 wide and a tight end and just go after it? Like just short routes, out routes, target your best players. And it just seems like Ryan Day has not learned a darn thing from Georgia. And I get it. You're in a quarterback battle and you're not sure who you can trust. You know what would build confidence? If you trust your quarterback. And not only that, what really concerns me is his whole thing was we're going to play both quarterbacks, Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. And he says we can't bench a guy if he makes a mistake. We have to let him play through it. Kyle McCord throws a pick. He gets benched for a series. Devin Brown goes in for 3 plays, and he hands off twice and then tries to run QB power. And then he switches them again, and Devin Brown gets no meaningful snaps. So basically, in public, you tell us you're going to do one thing, and then you do the complete opposite. I've said it before on this podcast. At some point, you are who you are. And Ryan Day, for some reason, when he feels pressure, he clenches as a play caller, which is why he needs to give it up, quite honestly. Because I think he has the potential to be a tremendous coach, and he has been very good for Ohio State. But these moments, he just does not let things go, with the exception of the Georgia game. And it's like, dude, why? Just let it rip. Indiana was not going to beat them. So I don't understand this back and forth kind of ridiculousness. I don't know what to... Obviously, I'm an Ohio State fan. I don't know what to make of this. I don't think it's panic mode quite yet. Like, I think the offensive line certainly has a lot of work to do. But my biggest concern is not the players. My biggest concern is when Ohio State goes and plays Notre Dame in 3 weeks, are we going to get dialed in aggressive Ryan Day, or are we going to get conservative buttoned up Ryan Day? And is he going to have it figured out who his quarterback is? Because if you just roll the tape, Kyle McCord's quarterback 1. But Ryan Day is saying again, well, we really do want to get Devin Brown valuable snaps. Well, you can't play it that way like you did Saturday if that's the case. So I that's my biggest concern with Ohio State. Kudos to Indiana. I thought they had a really good defensive game plan. Matt Gutierrez, former Ohio State assistant, now the defensive coordinator for Indiana, he may have had something to do with that. But again, I thought Indiana played as well as they could on defense, but also I thought Ohio State clenched up a bit. Let's talk Buffalo, Wisconsin. I said, and GP, you were right on this, at least for the time being. I was a little bit overzealous about my Tanner Mordecai hype. Granted, Wisconsin ran the ball a lot. They ran it up and down. Ches Malusi had an 89-yard touchdown run in this game. Both him and Braylon Allen ran over the Bulls, which they could, right? The Bulls are a lesser team. It took Wisconsin a couple quarters to figure it out, right? It was 14-10 at half, but then Wisconsin just wore them down. I do think Tanner Mordecai is better. It will be better. I just think it's probably going to take him time to get used to the system, get used to the players. I think part of why I'm high on Tanner Mordecai also is that, yes, he struggled against Power 5 competition when he was at SMU. He also now has Power 5 personnel to play with. So I think that will be a big deal. So Buffalo was a decent test for Wisconsin. Ultimately, I think it was good for them. They're working out the kinks. Obviously, a bigger test next week. I think it's next week against Washington State. That will tell us more, I think, about this Wisconsin team. Utah State, Iowa. Iowa wins 24-14. It was 14-0 in like the first 5 minutes of the game. And it was like, man, I don't know what happened to Brian Ferentz, but give him an extension. And now, after that, I think Iowa fans would tar and feather me if I said that out loud. Because they finished with 24 points against a pretty bad Utah State team. Now, granted, it was 21-3 at half. So in a sense, Iowa could kind of milk this away, And Brian Ferentz, 17 points, 17 points, that's a lot of offense, right? It's not bad. I thought Cade McNamara played well. I think he is certainly an upgraded quarterback for them. He 17-30 for 191 yards, 2 touchdowns. I'm a little concerned about the run game. Caleb Johnson only had 63 yards. So, a little concerned about that. I'm curious to see if this defense, kind of rounds into form. So it's weird to know. It's hard to really know what to expect, right? Like, I thought Iowa would have won by more, which I know as time goes on, you're like, why are you expecting that? I don't know. I am concerned about the Hawkeyes. I'm curious to see more from them. They play Iowa State next week. Be interesting to see how they handle that rivalry game. Again, Iowa with a 10-point win. It wasn't all that close, but it was still, it was ho-hum. It was ho-hum. It was a Brian Ferentz classic. Towson, Maryland, I don't feel like we need to talk about much. It was 38-3 or 38-6. They got up 28-3 and in a sense just kind of coasted. Tagovailoa did well. Four first half touchdowns. There's not much to really say other than it's Towson. That's what Maryland should have done. They just kind of shut it down a little bit earlier than I thought they would. Let's talk about some of the closer games or maybe the more surprising games. I said and I called Fresno State upsetting Purdue. Mikey Keene, transfer from UCF, threw 4 touchdown passes, really only had one bad play against Purdue as the pick in the fourth quarter. I said this on the Big Ten Huddle podcast, and it was actually the Russ over at Boiler Express expressed, I think, very similar sentiments to me. Fresno State's a good team. Like, this is their best non-conference opponent in both of our opinions. Actually, all three of us, I think JR, Russ, and I all said Fresno State is the best non-conference opponent that Purdue will face, and that's including Virginia Tech, that's including Syracuse. And you were really a minute away, 59 seconds away from winning that game. And a big reason, and again, I got comments about how could you think Purdue is going to be somewhat decent this year or could beat teams like Nebraska or anything like this. And the reason is simple. Hudson Card might be the best quarterback in the West. He didn't play great, but he certainly had good moments in this game. Maccabee had good moments in this game. And if they have quarterback play, Ryan Walters will get them settled down on defense. The reality is they lost a lot on defense and they're learning a new system. So it's going to take them time. But the fact that they have a quarterback who can drive the ball downfield, the fact that they have a running back who is, I think, an underrated weapon, that really helps them out. And I really do think that Purdue has a decent shot to get bowl eligible, which is not what I would have thought even a couple months ago when I was processing all that Purdue had lost and processing a new coach. But it is interesting, and especially watching other teams in the West, I assumed that Minnesota would be better than Purdue. I assumed that Illinois would be better than Purdue. I assume that Iowa and Wisconsin are better than Purdue. I'd still say Wisconsin and Iowa are my two favorites in the West. I'm not sure it's as clear-cut after this first week. Now, week one is the week of overreaction, so I'm not gonna declare that Purdue is, some world beater, that they're definitely going to win the West. But just realize, I thought Purdue acquitted themselves very well. Thought Hudson Card acquitted him very well, especially bringing them back in the fourth quarter. And ultimately, it was a heartbreaking loss to a team that was ranked in the top 25 last year. So, again, hats off to the Bulldogs. And I think Purdue fans have a lot to be excited about, despite the fact that they lost. I mentioned that I thought the best game of the weekend would be Toledo, Illinois. I didn't think it'd be quite this close. Toledo led 19-7 at one point. DeQuan Finn, is a game wrecker at quarterback. I think he's dynamic. I think he gives players fits. And the reason why I was really concerned about this for Illinois is the fact that they lost so many in the back end. And not just experience, but quality players. And so the fact that Illinois had lost that, they had lost Chase Brown, new quarterback, I was like, oh, this could be a little weird. I still didn't think it would be this close, nor did I think it would look like Toledo was in control for a good chunk of the game. So if you're Illinois, what do you make of this game? Well, first, I do think you have a good quarterback. Like Luke Altmaier, I would argue that Altmaier, Card, and I'm still on the Tanner Mordecai train. I think those are your three best quarterbacks in the Big Ten West. He's got good athleticism, he's got a good arm, and he's got some weapons to throw to, right? So I think that's encouraging. The defense wasn't great, but when they needed to make plays, they made them. Interception return for a touchdown, and that was after Altmaier threw a pick. They responded when they needed to, and they stopped the bleeding when they needed to. And so that to me signals that Illinois is not going to back down from a challenge, that Altmaier is a gamer, and he's pretty good. And they have answers. Here's my concern. As good as Toledo is, they're not at the caliber of Fresno State. They're not at the caliber of, I think, half the Big Ten West. In fact, my guess is Toledo would probably beat Northwestern. I'm not sure they'd beat anybody else. So if you're Illinois, granted, I think this is more matchup driven and experience driven. Like, I think down the road, later in the season, Illinois would probably win by a more comfortable margin. But if you're Illinois, that's where my concern is okay, we've got to regroup and kind of figure out how we can start faster, how we can have more answers earlier in the game. But aside from that, good on Illinois to finish, to come from behind, shows the character of the team. I think, again, I'm a huge Bielema believer, so good on them. Penn State, West Virginia, Drew Allar, I think easily is QB1 in the conference. It's just West Virginia. I get that. West Virginia is not very good, and I know Michigan fans in particular are going to be mad when I say this. JJ is good. He can make all the throws. He can escape. If you want to see a prototypical NFL quarterback, go watch Drew Allar. The way he navigates the pocket, he's above average athleticism. His arm strength is absurd. He's got good touch. I saw everything I needed to see from him. He checked all the boxes. Now, the tests will get tougher. He will play much better defenses. And so I think the offense sputtered a little bit, for sure. There were drops. There are other things. It's week one. I felt like Penn State was firmly in control throughout the game. My one concern, and I said it in my preview, that defensive line is light up front, and West Virginia was able to run the ball. And if West Virginia can run it, you got to worry about a lot of other running teams. Michigan, I think Michigan most notably, right? And that's the game that I think will at least mostly determine the Big Ten East. Now, I said I thought it would be a three-way tie with Ohio State. After this past weekend, I'm not so sure about that. I'm still circling Penn State, Michigan as maybe the most important game of the Big Ten at this point. And you've got to figure out a way to stop running teams. And what they did this past weekend is not going to cut it. So they got to figure out a way to bolster that defensive line. But you've got a quarterback. And he's the best quarterback I've seen at Penn State. Potentially the best quarterback I've seen at Penn State maybe in my lifetime. Maybe not since Kerry Collins. Like, this is a legit dude. And that's no disrespect to Trace. It's no disrespect to Sean Clifford. But this guy, he is, I think, head and shoulders above those guys. And I'm excited to see how he progresses. Also, talk about a game from Keandre Lambert-Smith. My gosh, that guy had a game. I know he had a drop, but 2 touchdowns, had the big play to open that game. Good for him. Lastly, we'll talk about Northwestern and Rutgers. There's not much to say. I think Rutgers did what they needed to do. I think the score is a little deceptive because they were up 17-0 at half, but really they had, I think, one really long drive, and then I think they had a short field on another score, and then in the second half they had a short field and another score. The reality is neither of them generated a ton of offense, and Rutgers, I think, should have been able to do more on offense against, no offense, a bad Northwestern defense. They didn't get to 300 yards. Now, they also held Northwestern to just over 200 yards. But again, I don't know what that means because I think Northwestern is not very good. I don't think Northwestern wins. They may not win a game this year. And I'm sorry to say that about Northwestern, but this is a bad team. Part of it is just all the circumstances around it. They don't have a lot of talent. I like Monangai. I like Wimsat. I think they played okay. But the reality is they're going to face defenses that can take those guys away more effectively. And so good for Rutgers for getting a conference win. These two teams might be the worst two teams in the conference. After watching week one. Again, week one, it's hard to make, definitive conclusions after week one, but that's where I'm at right now with these teams. Let me just do my power rankings real quick, and I'll send you out. 14, obviously, Northwestern. 13, I have Indiana for now. I just don't know what to make of Indiana because were they better than I thought and actually did some damage against Ohio State, or was Ohio State clunky and Indiana was the beneficiary? I don't know. I just have them 13th. I have Rutgers 12. Again, I don't think it bodes well that they only could score 24, especially when Northwestern couldn't do anything in that game. I have Nebraska 11. I think Nebraska showed a little bit more than I expected. Minnesota 10. I have Michigan State at 9 and Illinois at 8 and Purdue at 7. I'm just going to be very honest. I think Purdue to Nebraska is a big mess. I just don't know where to put teams. And the only reason why I have Minnesota over Nebraska because Minnesota beat Nebraska. I have Michigan State over Minnesota because they at least looked like they had somewhat of a competent offense, albeit against a lesser team. And I wouldn't say it was that great. I have Illinois above Michigan State because I think Illinois played a better MAC team, but I'm not very confident about that. And then Purdue, I think, played the best opponent out of all those 5 teams and probably should have won the game. So 7 through 11 feels like a big clump that I'm excited to see work its way out. And then 6, I have Iowa. 5, I have Maryland. 4, Wisconsin. 3, Ohio State. Penn State number 2, and Michigan number 1. I think Michigan handled their business the best. And again, it's Eastern Carolina. But until I see more ability for Penn State to stop the run, and honestly, Ohio State and Wisconsin have to have better showings if they want to get up into the top 2. Ohio State, I think, could drop further. They've got to figure stuff out. But I don't know if anyone can disagree with the top 4. I think Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, Wisconsin. And I think after that, Maryland and Iowa, you could kind of flip. Maryland played nobody. And so, and Iowa was Iowa. You're 24-14 could have been a 50-point blowout with another team, but that's just the way Iowa plays. So I don't know. But it'll be fun to see how things work itself out. I'll be recording a picks podcast, and it'll post either Thursday morning or Friday morning. I'm not sure yet when that'll post, but keep it locked in here at the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Again, Apple, Google, Spotify. Tell your friends. Share it on social media. We're excited. And go check out the Big Ten Huddle podcast. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. And the Boiler Express. Great podcasts. Great guys. Again, Zach Guggenheim signing off. Take care. God bless.